Over the next several weeks, the American International podcast will be exploring some of the films that AIP presented exclusively in their television packages as part of their American International Television division. Many of these films were imported from foreign markets, others were made specifically to be included as part of their television packages, and a few were picked up from other domestic distributors following their theatrical runs. In this series, we will be looking at films that are associated with AIP as a result of being presented in these television packages.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that's...
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're going to make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first.
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome to the American International Podcast, where we're continuing to look at the television output from American International. My name's Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And today we're talking about The Eye Creatures from 1966.
The Eye Creatures, also known as Attack of the Eye Creatures, was directed by Larry Buchanan.
The Eye Creatures stars John Ashley as Stan Kenyon, Cynthia Hall as Susan Rogers, Warren Hammack as Lieutenant Robertson, Chet Davis as Mike Lawrence, Bill Peck as Carl Fenton, Ethan Allen as Old Man Bailey, Charles McLine as Detective, Nathan Wiley as Colonel Harrison.
It also stars Tony Houston as Culver's Sergeant, Jonathan Lefdord as Corporal Culver, Shirley McLine as the diner waitress, Bob Brown as the general, Donna Lindberg as Ralph's girlfriend, Larry Tanner as Ralph, Jody Daniel as the man in diner, George Edgley as elderly detective, Bill Thurman as sergeant on guard, Edwin Cherry as desk sergeant, and Robert Bob Kelly as the morgue attendant, also uncredited.
A couple weeks ago, we looked at another Larry Buchanan film, Zontar, The Thing from Venus. That was a remake of It Conquered the World. Eye Creatures is a remake of Invasion of the Saucer Men, which we also just watched a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it's very fresh in our memories. So the similarities between the two movies were not lost on us. However, The Eye Creatures starts off with a very different scene that we did not see in Invasion of the Saucer Men. There's a military man with a briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, walking down a long hallway. He's granted access to a viewing room, and a general unlocks the cuffs for him to take possession of the briefcase and its contents. The courier leaves, but not before insisting that there be the utmost security with the contents of this briefcase. And then we see a close-up of the general's face.
He looks as if he's had a cranial implant of some sort.
I wrote down that his face looks as scarred as the moon. His face takes up the entire frame, so you can't miss it.
Anyway, the general has received a piece of film, and he's setting it up in his viewer. And as he does, Lieutenant Robertson comes in. So Lieutenant Robertson takes a seat, and he's debriefed by the general on the current project.
It's called Project Visitors. The general cautions Lieutenant Robertson to not take notes during this presentation. Basically, the general tells him that they know that they're aliens, and he feels the next contact will be here in Sector 3. But he's not at liberty to discuss the events that led him to that conclusion.
Then the general rolls the film, and he sees clips that we saw in Zontar, The Thing from Venus.
Right, it's a hokey-looking flying saucer-type spaceship. However, this one we see in conjunction with a space station, which we found out was made from a model toy kit.
There is some narration on the film, and the film states that Sector 6 is a likely site for contact, meaning that the general was wrong or that Sectors 6 and 3 are very close to each other.
Or the screenwriter took 10 seconds to contradict himself.
Then we cut away to Corporal Culver and his sergeant, and they're supposed to be monitoring the skies for possible alien activity, but they find this boring, so they find other ways to kill their time.
And to amuse themselves and their weird kinks. They're using their surveillance equipment to spy on kids in Lover's Lane. And they have a really good angle on a certain couple. They're in the car with them, up close and personal. Luckily, everybody's dressed.
The girl's hesitant because she feels as if she's being watched. And her instincts are right, she is.
And the two sergeants who are watching were in Zontar. One of them played Keith, the mad scientist, and the other one played the gate guard with the fake Brooklyn accent. And they're really hamming it up here, and not in a good way. Lieutenant Robertson joins them.
He was also in Zontar. He was one of the scientists.
Right, so everyone's kind of taken a career step down in this movie, or many steps in the case of Tony Houston.
Well, I believe this film was made first, so if we had watched them in the order that they were made, we would see a step up instead.
That's true. Lieutenant Robertson scolds them for doing what everyone knows that they always do, but then he joins them, and everybody gets their jollies watching these two people make out. It's very disgusting.
Then we cut away to a diner. Mike Lawrence and Carl Fenton are hitting on the waitress there.
Unsuccessfully?
Yeah, she doesn't go for it. So these guys came into town. They're drifters and grifters. And they're trying to plan some sort of scheme to take this town, and then they can move on to the next town. But it's a quiet town, so not much is going on. Carl wants to find some action, but that's not for Mike. He just wants to go home and go to bed.
So they split up. Carl goes for a drive. It's supposed to be nighttime. There's a lot of very badly done day for night shots. Sometimes it's just straight up day. There's a lightning strike, and that momentarily distracts the teen neckers.
They stop making out momentarily to look up at the sky, and then go back to what they were doing. This is very delightful for Corporal Culver in the military office, who's still spying on them.
Carl stops his car, and he gets out to look at something.
Now we're back at the diner, and there's a whole new set of clientele.
Actually, we get to meet our protagonist for the first time.
John Ashley as Stan Kenyon is there, and he's discussing with a couple of friends the spaceship they saw.
Lieutenant Robertson is also there. His story is that he's recruiting, but he doesn't really do much of that. He's just kind of flirting with the waitress as well.
But he's also overhearing the table by him where these kids are talking about the spaceship they just saw, and his job is to keep people from discussing the spaceships that they see.
Well, they do stop discussing it. Stan's friends ask him about his girlfriend, Susan, why she's not there. Stan says they're going to meet later. She's putting on a dress, and apparently that takes a long time. And then we get the same dialogue that we saw in Invasion of the Saucermen, where they talk about all her body parts being in the right place, and Stan says they're all mine, and it's just as gross now as it was then.
Since Lieutenant Robertson is allegedly in town for recruitment, the waitress suggests that these guys at the table might make good recruits. So she goes over to their table, and they are talking again about the spaceship they saw. In Invasion of the Saucermen, the ship was blue. Here, it was green.
Well, now it's time to meet another character who is a parallel to one in Saucermen. It's the grumpy old man. Here he's known as Old Man Bailey.
And like Farmer Larkin, he doesn't like people running amok on his property.
Or even driving past it, which is what Carl's doing right now. Carl drives his car up to Lover's Point, and then a little bit later drives it back, passing Old Man Bailey both times. And the second time, Old Man Bailey pulls his gun out and thinks better of shooting him, but he definitely could have.
Now we see that Susan must have arrived because she and Stan are making out over in Lover's Lane.
I can't get past Susan's hair. For some reason, it's like a bouffant made into a bun. It's such a huge bouffant. Like there must be something in there, like a football. That's how big it is. It's very distracting. I don't know if you felt that way, but I definitely did.
Anyway, Stan and Susan are planning on eloping tonight. They're done making out and ready to move on to other things. They start to head out, but Stan's headlights are going to annoy the other kids, so he decides to shut them off before driving out.
Carl rushes to the room and bed he shares with Mike to tell him that their get-rich scheme is in the bag.
He says they're going to put on an exhibition of a real honest-to-goodness spaceship. Mike's a little annoyed that he was awoken for this news,
which he does not believe. Carl keeps going on until Mike bops him on the head and sends him flying to the floor. Carl takes the hint and then goes to handle it himself, and Mike goes back to bed.
Now we see that Lieutenant Robertson has gone to Colonel Harrison's residence to report where the ship was sighted.
Colonel Harrison is wearing a leopard print bathrobe. He looks a little bit like a swinging Mel Cooley from the Dick Van Dyke Show. And just like in Saucerman, he tells the audience that Lieutenant Robertson was formerly a public information officer, and he needs to suppress all those instincts to share information, because this must be kept top secret.
So even though Stan and Susan are now out of sight from the kids they left behind, they are still driving with no lights, probably because they want to sneak past Old Man Bailey's house without disturbing him.
But they do manage to arouse the ire of Old Man Bailey regardless.
So as they're driving, they hit something.
We don't see anything.
Whatever it is, it's dead. They get out of the car to look at it, and they're surprised and relieved to see that it's not a person, but they're not sure what it is.
And it looks like the Michelin Man with lots and lots of eyes.
Whatever this thing is, its hand has come off, and the hand itself is crawling toward the car. It has sharp nails, and it punctures the tire. Stan and Susan hear the hiss, and Stan figures that the fender must have punctured the tire when he hit that thing. And since they can't drive on this and he doesn't have a spare, they're going to have to hoof it to Old Man Bailey's house to use the phone. They reach the house the next afternoon.
Yeah, the day for night does not hold throughout the movie. Very bad continuity here. Susan is reluctant to enter Old Man Bailey's house because she's heard it's haunted. But Stan assures her that the only thing it's haunted by is a grouchy old guy. So they go in and start snooping around through the closets for some reason, making a mess as they go, when all along the old crank telephone was hanging right on the wall in plain sight.
At one point, Stan opens the side door as he's talking to Susan, and we see an eye creature peeking in. He shuts it without looking to see what was behind the door when Susan notices the phone on the wall.
So they ring the cops, and of course the cops think that they're just some crazy teenagers. No one's going to believe a story about a weird alien creature being run over by a car. The cop hangs up and leaves Stan and Susan frustrated.
Another lightning strike and the lights go out. Susan glances out the window and sees one of the eye creatures and screams. Stan starts to investigate as the lights come on and Old Man Bailey comes home with his shotgun at the ready.
He's so happy to see them. Haha. They try to explain what happened, but he's not interested. They're on his property. He shoos them off and tells them to tell their friends that if he sees any of them, he's going to shoot them in the ass with rock salt. I'm paraphrasing.
He then calls the police, as he should, because these kids just broke into his home.
He's not wrong.
So Carl's on his way back to the spaceship that he found, and he comes across the body of the eye creature in front of Stan's car. He covers it with a blanket and decides to go to the nearest house to use the phone. This house is, of course, the one belonging to Old Man Bailey.
It's temporarily vacant at this time. So Carl calls Mike and tells him that now he's got proof, but he can't tell him what it is for some reason.
He wants Mike to get a cab and come out and help, but Mike's still in bed and he's not going out again tonight.
So as a compromise, Carl asks Mike to clean everything out of the refrigerator, and Mike will understand when Carl returns with this thing that he found.
This perishable thing.
So Mike, clad in a night dress, complies. For a while, anyway.
He starts emptying the refrigerator, but then he realizes that he's being ridiculous, so he goes back to bed. But this time, he inserts earplugs so as not to be disturbed.
And he won't be disturbed for a while. Carl returns to the alien creature, but this time more eye creatures are there, and they surround him and kind of paw him to death.
Now we see Lieutenant Robertson and Colonel Harrison are on the site. They're watching the spaceship from a safe distance. Robertson asks if they should call in photographers, and Harrison says no, this is a time for SOP. So they'll be calling engineers, as the procedure calls for.
So they already have an alien procedure in place. Stan and Susan return to their car where an eye creature is vandalizing their bumper. It doesn't see them, and they decide to run away. But then they go back when they see a cop car coming.
They figure that since the police are on the scene, that they can handle whatever it is that they've hit.
And that they believe them. And that's why they're out there.
So we see Stan and Susan giving their statement to the detective. The detective is happily hearing the story as he hands Stan a breathalyzer test. So the detective goes to the doctor he dragged along with him and tells him the story that the kids told them. And the doctor says it figures, well, with all the books they're writing these days.
I wonder what books he's referring to. But basically we have a series of miscommunications here. Stan and Susan are trying to tell the cops that they hit an alien without saying in so many words. And the cops are hearing them say that they killed a guy, but that it's no big deal.
But since Stan admitted that he hit something, and the something that the police found in front of Stan's car was Carl, they're going to be taking him and Susan downtown.
Once in the police station, they put a piece of paper in front of Stan and ask him to sign the statement. But when Stan reads it, it's actually a confession that he's about to sign. And Stan won't confess to killing a man.
Susan demands that they call her father.
She plays the "Do you know who my dad is" card.
And she's informed that he's already been called.
Because they did know who her dad was.
And guess what? He's here. He doesn't like that his daughter has been associating with this roughneck Stan with his jacket and tie.
Well, he is at least 10 years older than her.
He's going to take Susan home, and Stan can take the fall for all of this.
And Stan says, "Not yet. Just wait till you see the body, and you'll know what we're talking about."
The body is indeed ready for identification, so they all head to the morgue.
But first, we're going to cut away to the military. They're shooting at the spaceship with no result. And Colonel Harrison demands more firepower.
At the morgue, the coroner wheels out Carl's body, and they uncover him, and Stan is very surprised to see that there was actually a man under the sheet.
The cops have identified this as Carl. They know his address, his temporary address at least, and that he has a roommate. And they tell Stan and Susan this information, which is important because they're going to need it later. And then Susan's dad says something that's not cool. Susan's dad tells them that they are lucky in one respect. The man they killed was a nobody, and there's no one to care about him except that roommate.
Susan's dad wants to speak with Stan and Susan alone, so they head back to the detective's office.
Susan's dad tries to get Susan to leave again, but this time she confesses to being the one who was doing the driving. And this flusters her dad and leaves him unable to haul her off.
We go back to Colonel Harrison's men are trying to open the ship. They're using blowtorches, and it kind of sets off what appears to be a fuse. So they all jump out of the way as the fuse goes off and the ship explodes. The explosion distracts everybody, the kids making out, and even at the police station, everybody's scattered and leave Stan and Susan alone in the room to see what has happened.
Once alone, Stan starts to think. He concludes that the aliens are smarter than them, duh, and that they framed Stan and Susan. That's what they were doing at his bumper, denting it so that the cops would think that Stan hit a man. They want to leave, and once they realize the door is open and there's nobody out there, they do.
Everyone in the police station is still trying to figure out what that large boom was. The desk sergeant is surprised to see that the detective is still there because he says that the detective's car just left. So obviously Stan and Susan use that as their getaway vehicle.
Now we're back with our perverted spy guys.
They admit they're in a little bit of trouble because a spaceship has landed and they missed it. But what's done is done. So
and they're not going to let that stop them from getting their kicks. However, when they try to tune in the Smoocher channel, instead they get a shot of the eye creature. Or one of them anyway. But they think they're watching a movie.
Because what they see is just too horrible looking to be real. Corporal Culver, noticing that the creature they're watching is walking kind of wobbly, so he places a bet with his sergeant that the creature on the television is going to walk off a cliff. The sergeant asks him if he's seen this film before. Corporal says no, and so the sergeant takes that bet just in time to watch the creature. He doesn't jump, he doesn't walk, he doesn't fall. It's
like Wile E. Coyote taking that last step away from the cliff without realizing that there's nothing underneath him. He just walks straight down. And we get a great angle from at least 2 other cameras as he falls and lands.
So the military is very prepared.
They have cameras everywhere.
So Corporal Culver has won the bet.
Susan and Stan drive the cop car back to their car.
They're going to find some evidence to clear Stan's name.
And the evidence is coming their way, but they don't realize it. That alien hand is on the move. It manages to hoist itself up into the detective's car. Stan and Susan return, having found nothing, and then drive off with it.
Susan suggests that maybe the other kids might have seen something, so they're going to head over to where they're hanging out.
In the meantime, Stan throws his arm around Susan, and she kind of chides him for being too handsy. She's too tense, and she giggles about being frightened on her wedding night, but in an unexpected way, in a line completely stolen from Invasion of the Saucermen. And after Stan takes his hand away, the alien puts the moves on her and touches her shoulder. She turns around to see what did that, and then she screams.
They jump out of the car, leaving the hand inside the car, and realizing that this is the evidence that they'll need.
However, they have to get the cops there to look at it, and the cops don't believe them. Also, they're fugitives at this point.
So Stan suggests that they try to find the friend of the dead guy. They have his address.
And he's an adult, and adults are believed while teenagers are not.
So we cut to Mike and late Carl's apartment, where Mike is sitting on his bed listening to the story that Stan and Susan are telling them, and he thinks it's incredible.
Since he doesn't believe them, Stan and Susan tell him to call the police. After all, the police have been trying to reach him all this time, and that will verify the story. He calls, he's convinced, and he agrees to help them. And he grabs his camera on the way out.
He does not grab a gun that he lifted off a dead Nazi.
No, it'd probably be weird holding onto a dead Nazi's gun in 1967. However, you can do it in 2024, and that's fine.
So that was something they left behind in the Invasion of the Saucermen script and did not carry forward.
There's too much of the spying on smoochers footage to leave that in. Now they're out at Susan's car. They apparently traded the cop car for Susan's car. Stan is driving, Susan's in the middle, and Mike is in the passenger seat. They try to start the car, but it doesn't start because of a lack of battery water. That was an Invasion of the Saucermen. I didn't understand what it meant then, and I don't understand what it means now. I've never in my life watered a battery.
They're going to have to get out and push the car. Mike's not going to help because he's a guest there, but he'll man the steering wheel. So Stan and Susan climb out and head to the back of the car, and Mike is impressed with the spotlight that they have. Maybe the car doesn't run, but it does have a nice spotlight set up there.
Susan only uses it because the chrome makes a good makeup mirror, though. Such a girl.
They give the car a little push and it gets the car started. Stan and Susan hop back in. And Susan mentions that the car's name is Elvis. Mike asks why, and Stan says because it shakes and shimmies, just like Elvis did 10 years ago.
Yeah, they took that line wholesale from Saucerman.
Yeah, by this time Elvis was just making a bunch of bad movies and not doing much shimmying and shaking, so it seems a little out of place. But
he wasn't Fat Elvis yet. In 1977, it would have been downright tacky, honestly.
The car could have been jiggling.
Wearing a lot of scarves.
We cut back to the military where Robertson and Harrison are congratulating themselves on a job well done.
And the desk sergeant from the police is there, but he can't get through the barricade. Lieutenant Robertson tells him nothing, but he does make up a lie about a plane crash. Yeah, apparently the flying saucer was reduced to ash and there's nothing left. But then Lieutenant Robertson says that theirs may not be the only unit that's covering up a huge secret, and that gives Colonel Harrison something to think about.
I don't know if the eye creatures realize they are now stranded on Earth, but they have other things to worry about. That they're at the detective's car and they're trying to rescue the hand that is stuck in there.
I guess their fingers aren't functional enough to open the door, though. Stan, Susan, and Mike approach, and the eye creatures run off. Mike tries to see the hand in the back seat, and it's kind of hiding at first, but then it crawls out, and he finally believes.
He decides he needs to take a picture, so he goes back to the car to grab his camera. When he takes that picture, the flash causes the hand to disintegrate.
Now Mike's excited to go to the cops, but Stan advises him to be calm when he calls. They don't believe anyone who's hysterical.
But at least they can't accuse him of being an hysterical kid. So they all hop back into Susan's car, and once again, it won't start. They don't really have time to get out and try and push it, though, because eye creatures are coming out from the shadows.
They're surrounded. Stan turns on the spotlight, causing one of those creatures to blow up like fireworks. But the battery is dying, so Mike decides to make a run for it alone. He
doesn't get far. He's surrounded by eye creatures, and they give him a body hug.
Stan and Susan try to fight off the creatures around the car. They grab the camera and use the flash to scare off one or two so that they can drive away.
They don't get far before Susan needs to stop and rest. While resting, she suggests that they give themselves up. If they tell the police where they are, the police will come to pick them up, and then they can kind of con them into helping Mike.
But when they do go to Old Man Bailey's and make that phone call, the cops tell them that they're off the hook. Carl died of alcohol poisoning, not a hit and run.
He also says not to sweat the car that they stole because they'll pick it up and it's all good.
Probably because her dad is a somebody. With nothing else to do, Stan and Susan decide to follow their first instincts and go to Lover's Point to get their teenage posse together.
We cut back one last time to the military where Harrison and Robertson have finished their cleanup of the spaceship debris. And they discuss how they can read about the jet crash in tomorrow morning's paper.
They're very smug about that. So the teenage posse assembles. They park their cars in a circle, all facing each other. The aliens helpfully walk into the center of this ring. At Stan's signal, he honks the horn. Everyone turns on their headlights, and all the aliens explode into flames.
Mike is there. They wake him up. He's fine. But Old Man Bailey hears the ruckus and lets off a shot with his gun, so all the kids scatter.
Stan and Susan hop into a car with a couple of backseat smoochers. They wonder what will happen the next time aliens appear. Stan hopes that there's an adult there to take care of it.
Now that their adventure for the evening is done, they decide to go on with their original plan to elope. So Stan asks Ralph, who's in the backseat, if he would be his best man.
And Susan asks Cheryl, not me, in the backseat to be her maid of honor. They seem a little surprised that they're getting married this young, as we all are, but they agree. But then they go back to smooching, and Stan and Susan start reflecting on the joys of being a teenager. And they start smooching as well. And that's the end.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, where we're discussing The Eye Creatures from 1966.
After making Free, White, and 21 for AIP, the studio hired Buchanan to make a series of low-budget color remakes of some of their black and white films. And we've already mentioned that before, but this is the first of those films made by Buchanan's Azalea Pictures company.
Of all the remakes, The Eye Creatures contains the highest percentage of new or rewritten dialogue and material, but the only real addition to the story was the army guys spying on the teenage lovebirds.
Boy, was there a lot of that. The film was shot in 16mm over several weeks in Dallas, Texas, on a budget of $40,000, though some sources put the budget at less than $25,000. John Ashley was an AIP regular drafted from Hollywood, But the rest of the cast were locals, cast from Dallas theaters. According to Ashley, his salary took up more than half the budget. And as a side note, Ashley here is 31 years old when the movie was made, significantly older than his character is meant to be.
Filming took 2 weeks, and the scenes were shot at Cielo, the Dallas ranch owned by Gordon McClendon, a wealthy local businessman.
According to Ashley, this film ranks with some of the worst all-time horror films ever made. The monster looked like something out of a Michelin tire ad, but he said it was a professional operation. He's quoted as saying, "Buchanan was a nice guy, and it was a real at-ease pace. We just kind of worked until we felt like, okay, that's enough." It was a very small crew and quite well organized. Buchanan had it together.
When Ashley made the film, his marriage to AIP regular Deborah Wally was near its end. Buchanan said later that, "We got John Ashley on the weekend that his wife Deborah Wally said goodbye to him, and here I am with him on the set the next morning. He was in bad shape." Deborah had gone over to Arkansas on an AIP publicity junket on one of those beach party things, and John asked me if he could fly up and see her. I said, "John, we just started." I sat down with him and worked it out. I shot around him for 2 days while he tried to reconcile with her. It didn't work. But it did work for me in that when he came back, he worked his tail off. I told him he had to make a break, he had a little money, and go as far away from Deborah as he could get. And we talked long into the night about shooting, casting, and making movies. I don't think we ever stopped on that picture. We would work all day and talk all night. And then he went off to Manila and began making those Bamboo Girl pictures and made a fortune.
Hey, Savage Sisters. We saw that. In the biography, Paul Blaisdell, Monster Maker, Randy Palmer wrote that the eye creatures costumes were the work of Jack Bennett, a Dallas advertising executive who taught himself the ins and outs of theatrical makeup and film technique. Bennett supplied the creature costumes for all the Azalea pictures.
The same eye creature costume later turned up in the AIP release The Ghost in the Invisible Bikini in 1966.
Buchanan pinched some of the music cues from Ronald Stein's scores to Invasion of the Saucermen, It Conquered the World, and The She-Creature, apparently without Stein's knowledge and definitely not permission. He also borrowed both background scoring and the musical theme from the song Treat Him Nicely, direct from AIP's Beach Party movie from 1963, peppering them throughout the film. I definitely heard that.
A pair of shots depicting a spaceship landing were taken from Invaders from Mars from 1953, and the scenes of the flying saucer would be repurposed in Zontar, the Thing from Venus.
And we did discover just this morning a little mystery about the actor who played the unnamed sergeant, who's one of the peepers, and who was also Keith in Zontar, the Thing from Venus. His name is Anthony Houston in the credits. That's not his real name. His real name is Enrique Tuceda III, but in the movies here, he's known as Tony Houston. However, there's another Tony Houston who's the son of director John Houston, the brother of actor Angelica Houston, and we found that their IMDb and Wikipedia entries were basically jumbled together.
Yeah, the first clue was that, well, we found it hard to believe that this guy was Angelica Houston's brother.
I mean, just from quality of acting alone.
And then IMDb gives the year of birth as 1950, which means that this actor would have been 16 years old when this movie was made. So obviously there was some conflation in the information on IMDb.
Enrique Tuceda uses the stage name Anthony Houston, spelled like the city, but that's not how the Houston family spells it. There's no O. But if you look on IMDb's entry for Tony Houston, Angelica's brother, he has the credits from all the Azalea picture movies that Anthony Houston was in, Enrique Tuceda. And even in Wikipedia, the two are mixed up. However, there's a Rick Tuceda listed who wrote some scripts for the Beverly Hillbillies, who's married to Pat Delaney, who was in Zontar, the Thing from Venus, and who is actually this man's real wife. So we can tell that that's the guy. Rick Tuceda is the entry that all these credits should be under, but instead they're under Tony Houston, the son of John Houston. I'm surprised no one from the Houston family has cleared that up, because I wouldn't want to be associated with these movies if I didn't do them.
The Eye Creatures was first shown on television in October of 1967 in AITV's Amazing Adventures 67 syndication package.
This movie had a couple of taglines, even though it wasn't theatrical. One of them is, "The nightmare terror of the slithering eye that unleashed agonizing horror on a screaming world."
World panic as UFOs approach Earth.
Is it true? Are creatures from space watching us now? No, but the military is.
The Eye Creatures was lampooned on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in a 1992 Season 4 episode. The print used in the program had been retitled, and whoever added Attack of the to the Eye Creatures failed to notice that the word the was included twice in the film. AIP gets the blame for the error in Palmer's biography of Paul Blaisdell, but that may not be the case, as it isn't in the print we watched.
We just don't know. MST3K's writers leapt on the cheap production values, like seeing a zipper on a costume, seeing some of the actors wearing only the head and a bodysuit and running shoes. And they declared at the end that the filmmakers just didn't care. And I think that's pretty fair.
So when we watched Zontar a few weeks ago, that movie was hard to talk about because it being such a close remake to the original, it was very difficult to see it as its own thing because it's very much not. And we have the same problem with Eye Creatures because while there are certainly some differences, a lot of the lines in script are lifted directly from Invasion of the Saucermen.
And the stuff that was added, the original content, as it were, is not good. It's not necessary. It's creepy and yucky, and I don't know who it's meant to appeal to. This was supposed to be shown on like Saturday afternoon monster movie theater. Are 10-year-old boys supposed to watch these guys peeping on people making out and be like, oh, that's cool? I just didn't get that at all.
Well, that didn't really need to be in the plot. And you had mentioned something to me earlier off mic about how this movie had originally been 69 minutes and then pushed up to 80. I'm guessing that's probably the footage that was added to extend the running time.
Oh, yeah, it definitely was. But I'm just saying, why not come up with something else that's more sci-fi and less kink, I guess. So I didn't appreciate that at all.
It doesn't really seem to fit in because Invasion of the Saucermen is very much a horror comedy. And it's not that the actors were playing it tongue-in-cheek so much, but a lot of that just came from Ronald Stein's score, which was so whimsical that it kind of gave the film a comic element that may not have been there without it.
And here, if that is meant to be the comic element, it really falls flat. There's just not a lot to be gained by adding these scenes. It's not funny. It's icky.
Well, they don't really fit in because the Eye Creatures isn't played up for comedy at all. The score that is stolen is either the sappy Treat Me Nicely stuff or the foreboding stuff from It Conquered the World.
Right. It's a weird mix.
And there's not really a lot of humor in this, except for some of the lines which are lifted and just out of place being played the same way 10 years later.
I read a review of this movie that suggested that the scenes of the government watching the teenagers was meant to be some sort of allegory towards the surveillance state and paranoia in the post-war era. And I'm not sure I buy that it was that intentional and that it's meant to be some sort of overarching damnation of the government and its treatment of its citizens. It just seems like somebody had a fetish and decided to indulge that on film.
I think it's more like we need to pad out this story, so we need to add some more characters. What can we have them do? They're watching the movie and commenting on it without having any idea what they're watching.
Sort of like Mystery Science Theater and us.
And some of the stuff that was lifted wasn't lifted in its entirety, and so it doesn't really play as well as it should. When it's revealed that Carl died of acute alcohol poisoning, there's really no reason for that. They don't establish that these aliens are injecting alcohol. They just have sharp claws that can puncture tires, and there's no wrestling with a bull.
Oh, I did miss that.
To establish any of this. And even Frank Gorshin was always sipping out of a flask. We don't see Carl do this.
No, he just is on the hunt for something to cheat people out of money for.
Right. So Stan is cleared from hitting him with his car because he died of acute alcohol poisoning.
And they don't go any further with it after that.
Exactly.
So yeah, the stuff that they left out, they could have expanded upon.
They should have expanded upon.
But they wanted their kink stuff in there. That's what I'm trying to say. They left out stuff that would have been good for the movie in order to shoehorn that icky footage in.
And there were lines like when I was talking about the detective and talking to the doctor, because those lines are taken from the original script when that man was a doctor, but he was actually the elderly detective and kind of a partner in this. But because they didn't bother to change the lines at all, the character was changed.
Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff that was overlooked. And it doesn't really speak to an aptitude in directing. I think that Larry Buchanan probably did the best he could. He may have run a professional set, but I think he just had some limitations, and those are very evident in this movie.
So no writers are credited with this film, which is good because if they would credit anybody, it would have to be the writers of the original Invasion of the Saucermen, Paul W. Fairman, Robert J. Gurney Jr., and Al Martin, because they basically just used the same script, added a couple things, changed the look of the monsters, which may not have been script specific, and got rid of the bull and the alcohol, changed the names, and made a movie.
Since they didn't say who wrote the additional material, I'm going to assume it was Larry Buchanan, but we don't know for sure. What did you think of the look of the aliens in this movie compared to the original?
Well, as I said when we did Invasion of the Saucermen, those aliens are iconic. And the eye creatures aren't iconic.
Good one.
I think they're creepy if you bumped into one in real life. As a movie monster, they don't work so well.
No, I don't think they do either. They seem a little slimy, but they aren't articulated. They have these weird mesh mouths, big gaping mouths, but they don't do anything. They have eyeballs all over their skin, but the eyes don't do anything either. So they call them the eye creatures, but they really aren't looking at anything with their back eyes or their arm eyes or their leg eyes. They wander around on 2 feet like any other biped.
If they are just covered with eyes, I would kind of like to have seen them do something different at the end instead of using light to make them disintegrate. Maybe kick dirt at them and and then make them fold into themselves or something.
Some shampoo that's not no tears. It's pretty stupid to have an alien being, and this applies to both movies, that is completely disabled by any kind of light source.
Well, it does make sense if it's an eye creature because bright light is harmful to your eyes.
Then you would close your eyes. You wouldn't explode.
How do you know? Have you ever looked into a bright light long enough? Maybe you would.
I think my eyes would go blind first, long before I ever exploded. The invasion, such as it is, could never last any longer than just overnight. As soon as they're out and the sun comes out, they're just going to be immolated. So it's not a very threatening alien. All they do is get you drunk and then explode at dawn.
If they get you drunk. We don't know that, if that's what happens in this film.
Well, in Invasion of the Saucermen, that is what they did. The Invasion of the Saucermen creatures were so cute. It was hard to take them seriously as a threat, but I think that's what I liked about them. It was much more of clever costuming.
So given what you said, Cheryl, how are you going to rate the eye creatures using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
I'm a little surprised by how I'm not mad at this movie for not living up to Invasion of the Saucermen. I was extremely angry with Zontar, the Thing from Venus, and everything it changed in its evolution from It Conquered the World. I really enjoyed the performances in It Conquered the World, and nearly every single performance in Zontar, the Thing from Venus was deplorable, just not worth my time. But this movie, not that I really like John Ashley, although he was fantastic in Savage Sisters, but I don't think there's a huge step down in quality from the acting in The Eye Creatures from Invasion of the Saucermen. Everyone was pretty good, and they definitely had a lot more character in Invasion of the Saucermen, but I think the acting is pretty adequate. I didn't think Cynthia Hull did a bad job at all. I think she kept up with John Ashley, acting-wise, and the actors who played Mike and Carl were at least adequate. I didn't like them, but their acting was fine. No Frank Gorshin, of course, but I don't even remember who the other guy was, so they're fine. And the story, except for the addition of the guys watching the smoochers, it was fine too. I think I'm going to give this an I because it's perfectly adequate as a movie. There definitely are some points against it, but I just don't feel like giving this a P the way I did with Zontar, which just severely disappointed me so much. Maybe I'm just becoming more used to Larry Buchanan's filmmaking style and it doesn't make me cringe as much, but that's how I feel. What about you, Jeff?
I don't think you're getting used to anything. I think that the acting here was just much better than it was in Zontar. When we did that episode, I just kept talking about how all the line readings were just so flat and bland, and I didn't feel that here. This actually felt like normal people talking sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
It might be because the accents weren't as pronounced. That might have helped.
Yeah.
John Ashley always has his accent, but we're getting used to that. What is interesting about this film is that, as I mentioned, they don't really carry forward the comic overtones of Invasion of the Saucermen. This movie almost plays as more of a horror movie. And it's a little scarier. A lot of it, again, is the score, as it was Invasion of the Saucermen's score that made it more of a comedy. But the music kind of tells you how to feel in a movie. And they chose a score that tells you this isn't funny. The stuff that's supposed to be funny is the two army guys watching the kids make out. And you can cut all that stuff and it doesn't affect the plot at all. And maybe you should. They do give a little more backstory to the military and what they're doing there, which kind of lended more of a heaviness to what's going on here.
Right. It's not the first time.
Whereas in the first one, we don't see any evidence of the army until we get to the diner and the recruiter is there.
He's the first one to know what's going on.
Right. And this is a whole operation that states why this guy is here in the first place. So I think that was an improvement, maybe the only improvement over Invasion of the Saucermen. But to me, this movie wasn't as painful to watch as Xantar.
Right.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that's a story thing, because if I was going to look at the stories for Invasion of the Saucermen and It Conquered the World, I'd probably give It Conquered the World the higher rating. But as a film, The Eye Creatures is better than Xantar, The Thing from Venus.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I had to give it a step up in grade.
But I'm not going to give it a whole letter grade upgrade. This one's still an I.
This is definitely not an A.
So I think we've looked at The Eye Creatures long enough.
Let's close those eyes.
This has been the American International Podcast. Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And stay tuned. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.